There I was, standing in the middle of a crowded birthday party, my paper plate untouched, my hands trembling with disbelief. The laughter had stopped. The room was frozen, and my own father, Thomas Reed, lifted his champagne glass, gave a proud smirk to the crowd, and said, "To my real daughter, Haley, the one who carries my name with pride, not that bastard over there." He pointed at me. My knees buckled under the weight of the silence that followed. The sting of that word, bastard, hit harder than I ever imagined. I wasn't a child. I wasn't someone who needed his approval anymore. I was 41, a mother, a wife, a woman who had clawed her way through life without him. But still, I had come to this party. I had shown up hoping, deep down, to finally be seen. That's when she spoke. From the corner of the room, my mother-in-law's mother, Eleanor Baker, leaned forward, narrowed her tired eyes, and muttered just loud enough for the table to hear, "He shouldn't talk about bastards, not with what he did back then. Poor Allison never knew." My heart stopped. What he did back then? People turned toward her. The room shifted, and suddenly the real story, the one buried under decades of lies, began to unravel. The day had started so ordinary, so deceptively simple. Morning light filtered through the curtains of our suburban home in Wilmington, North Carolina, as I stood in front of the mirror, debating whether to wear the navy dress or the emerald blouse. Marcus, my husband of 15 years, stood behind me, his hands resting gently on my shoulders. "You look beautiful in both," he said, kissing the top of my head. "But Eleanor always says how much she loves you in green." I smiled at him through the mirror. Marcus was my rock, my constant, the man who had seen me through every doubt, every tear, every silent birthday when the phone didn't ring. "Green it is, then," I said, reaching for the blouse. "For Eleanor." The invitation to my mother-in-law's 83rd birthday. Celebration had arrived 3 weeks earlier, a cream-colored envelope with elegant script. It was being held at the Riverside Garden, an upscale venue with a view of the Cape Fear River. Nothing but the best for Eleanor Baker, matriarch of a family that had welcomed me more warmly than my own blood ever had. "Are you sure you're okay with going?" Marcus asked, his voice careful. He knew what these family gatherings meant for me. Who might be there? "It's Eleanor's birthday," I said, fastening a simple pearl earring. "Besides, I'm not a child anymore. I can handle him. Him, my father, Thomas Reed, the man who had missed every piano recital, every graduation, every milestone. The man who lived 20 minutes away but might as well have been on another planet. The man who had started a new family, a real family, as he once put it, when I was just 7 years old. Our children, Emma and Lucas, were waiting for us downstairs, dressed in their Sunday best. Emma, at 14, was already showing signs of the woman she would become, thoughtful, observant, with a quiet strength that sometimes startled me. Lucas, 11, still had that little boy energy, bouncing on his heels, checking his watch dramatically. "Mom, we're going to be late," Lucas announced as we descended the stairs. "And I want cake." I laughed, ruffling his hair. "The cake isn't going anywhere, buddy." The drive to Riverside Garden was short but felt longer with each mile. I stared out the window, watching the familiar landscape of Wilmington blur past, the historic downtown with its brick-lined streets, the sprawling oak trees draped in Spanish moss, the glittering glimpses of water between buildings. This city had been my home all my life. Every corner held a memory, some good, some painful. "You're quiet," Marcus said softly, reaching for my hand across the console. "Just thinking," I replied, squeezing his fingers, "about Eleanor, about how lucky I am to have her in my life." It wasn't a lie. Eleanor Baker had been more of a parent to me than my own father ever was. From the moment Marcus had introduced us, she had embraced me with open arms. No questions, no judgments, just love. But as we pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Garden, I couldn't help the knot that formed in my stomach, because I knew without a doubt that Thomas Reed would be there, with his wife Barbara, and with Haley, his golden child, the daughter he had chosen, the daughter he had never denied. The venue was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, white tablecloths adorned with centerpieces of yellow roses, Eleanor's favorite, soft classical music drifting through the air. The room was already half full with familiar faces, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends accumulated over Eleanor's long and generous life. Marcus's sister Janet spotted us immediately and waved us over. She embraced me tightly, whispering, "So glad you came. Mom's been asking for you." I smiled, genuinely warmed. Wouldn't miss it for the world. But as Janet led us toward the table where Eleanor sat, resplendent in a powder blue dress and a string of pearls, I saw them. In the corner, by the champagne fountain. Thomas, Barbara, and Haley. My father looked older than when I'd last glimpsed him, at a distance, at the town's 4th of July celebration 3 years ago. His once dark hair was now completely silver, but he still stood tall, still commanded attention with that same self-assured stance. Barbara, his wife of 34 years, looked polished as ever in a designer dress, her blonde hair, perfectly styled. And then there was Haley, my half-sister, 27, successful, adored. Everything I had never been in his eyes. She caught my gaze, and for a split second, something passed between us. Recognition, perhaps, or shared discomfort. But then she turned away, laughing at something her mother had said. "Allison!" Eleanor's voice, still strong despite her years, cut through my thoughts. She extended her hands toward me, her face lighting up with genuine joy. "Come here, my dear girl." I knelt beside her chair, embracing her gently, breathing in her familiar scent of lavender and powder. "Happy birthday, Eleanor." "You look lovely," she said, patting my cheek. "That color brings out your eyes, just like your mother's." The mention of my mother, Maggie, who had passed away 5 years ago after a brief but brutal battle with cancer, brought a lump to my throat. She would have loved to be here. She always said you were the wisest woman she knew. Eleanor's eyes softened. Maggie was a fighter, just like you. The afternoon progressed pleasantly enough. We ate finger sandwiches and fruit platters, mingled with guests, watched as Eleanor opened gifts with the delight of a much younger woman. I kept to my side of the room, Marcus and the children close, avoiding the corner where my father stood holding court. But in a room of 60 people, space eventually runs out. I was getting punched for Lucas when I felt a presence beside me. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. "Allison," my father said, his voice exactly as I remembered it, deep, authoritative, with that slight edge that always made me feel I was being evaluated and found wanting. I straightened my shoulders, turned, and met his gaze. "Hello, Thomas." Not Dad. Never Dad. That privilege had been forfeited long ago. He looked uncomfortable, shifting the champagne flute in his hand. "You look, well, thank you," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "So do you." An awkward silence stretched between us, filled with 3 decades of absences, of missed calls, of empty seats at graduations. "Your kids," he finally said, nodding toward Emma and Lucas, who were helping Eleanor arrange her gifts. "They're growing up fast." "Yes," I said. "Emma's starting high school next year. Lucas is in 5th grade now." Another silence. Then, "Haley just made partner at her law firm." Of course. It always came back to Haley. I nodded politely. "Congratulations to her." I could have said more. Could have mentioned my own career as a child psychologist, the practice I had built from scratch, the book I had published last year on childhood trauma. But what was the point? In his eyes, I would always be the mistake, the burden, the reminder of his indiscretion with a waitress from the wrong side of town. "Well," he said, already turning away, "good to see you." And just like that, he was gone. Back to Barbara and Haley, back to the family he had chosen. I stood there, punch cup in hand, a familiar emptiness expanding in my chest. But I pushed it down, as I had learned to do years ago. I had my own family now. I had people who loved me, who chose me every day. The waitstaff began bringing out the birthday cake, a magnificent 3-tiered creation topped with spun sugar that caught the light like diamonds. Everyone gathered around as Eleanor was wheeled to the center of the room, her face aglow with happiness. After the candles were blown out and the cake was being served, someone tapped a glass for attention. My stomach dropped when I saw it was my father, standing, tall with his champagne raised. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced, his voice carrying across the now quiet room, "to Eleanor Baker, a remarkable woman who has touched so many lives, and to family, the bonds that truly matter." People murmured in agreement, raising their glasses. I reached for Marcus's hand, sensing what was coming. "Speaking of family," Thomas continued, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Haley, who stood beaming at his side, "I'd like to recognize my daughter, who makes me proud every day." A pause. A deliberate, cutting pause. To my real daughter, Haley, the one who carries my name with pride. Not that bastard over there. He pointed at me. Time seemed to collapse into a single excruciating moment. The word, bastard, hung in the air like a physical thing, sharp and poisonous. I felt every eye in the room turn to me, some with shock, others with pity, a few with cruel curiosity. The champagne glass in my hand trembled, sending tiny ripples across the golden surface of the liquid. Marcus was immediately beside me, his arm around my waist, solid and protective. "Let's go," he whispered, already turning me toward the door. But I couldn't move. My feet seemed rooted to the spot, my body frozen in the moment of impact. I had spent 41 years being dismissed, ignored, treated as less than by the man who should have loved me most in the world. But this public humiliation, this deliberate cruelty, was something new, something worse. A few nervous laughs broke the silence, quickly stifled. Someone coughed. Barbara tugged at Thomas's sleeve, whispering something urgent in his ear, but he just shrugged her off, taking another sip of champagne. Haley stood slightly apart from them now, her face flushed with what looked like embarrassment. For a moment, our eyes met across the room, and I saw something there. Regret? Shame? But then she looked away, down at her perfectly manicured hands. I felt my children before I saw them, Emma and Lucas appearing at my side, confusion and hurt written across their young faces. Lucas's eyes were wide with uncertainty. Emma's were narrowed with a protective fury that made her look years older. "Mom?" Lucas's voice was small. "What does that word mean?" The innocence of the question broke through my paralysis. I opened my mouth to respond, though God knows what I would have said, when another voice cut through the tension in the room. "He shouldn't talk about bastards, not with what he did back then. Poor Allison never knew." Eleanor's voice, though softened by age, carried with surprising clarity. All heads turned toward her. She sat straight in her wheelchair, her eyes fixed on Thomas with a look of such piercing disapproval that he actually took a step back. "What's that supposed to mean, Eleanor?" Thomas asked, his confident tone wavering slightly. Eleanor Baker might have been 83, her body frail, but in that moment, she seemed to possess a steel-like strength that commanded the room's attention. "It means, Thomas Reed, that you've been living a lie for 4 decades, and it's time Allison knew the truth." My heart hammered against my ribs. The truth? What truth? I had spent my entire life believing I knew exactly where I stood. An unwanted child, a mistake, the product of a brief affair between a wealthy businessman and a young waitress who had dared to keep her baby despite all pressure to do otherwise. "Eleanor," Marcus's father Robert said gently from beside her, "perhaps this isn't the time or place." "No, Robert," she interrupted, patting his hand, but keeping her gaze fixed on Thomas. "I've kept silent too long, for Maggie's sake, but Maggie's gone now, and I won't let this man stand here and shame her daughter. Not when he was the one who begged her to keep that baby. Not when he promised her the world and then abandoned them both." The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "What?" I whispered, though I wasn't sure anyone heard me. Thomas's face had gone from confident to alarmed. "You're confused, Eleanor. You're mixing things up. Old age, you know." He gave a forced laugh, looking around the room as if expecting others to join in. No one did. "I'm old, Thomas, not senile," Eleanor replied coolly. "I remember it clearly. The night Maggie came to me, crying because you told her you were going to leave Barbara for her, only for her. To discover you had no intention of doing any such thing, that you only said it to keep her quiet about the pregnancy." Barbara made a small, pained sound, her hand flying to her throat. "That's a lie," Thomas said, his voice rising. "I never wanted that child. I told Maggie to get rid of it." The cruelty of the words struck me like a physical blow. I had always suspected my father resented my existence, but to hear it stated so baldly, so callously, was another level of pain entirely. But Eleanor wasn't finished. She turned to me now, her eyes softening with compassion. "Your mother loved you more than life itself, Allison. She worked herself to the bone to give you everything she could. But Thomas," she spat the name like it tasted bitter, "he did more than just abandon you. He legally disowned you." "I know that," I said quietly. It wasn't news. I had grown up without his name, without his support, without his presence. Maggie had given me her maiden name, Mitchell. I had become Allison Mitchell, not Allison Reed. No, dear, Eleanor said gently. You don't know the whole story. He didn't just walk away. He signed papers denying you were his, legally, officially, even, though he knew you were. He paid lawyers to make sure the DNA test your mother wanted could never happen. The room was so quiet now you could hear the ice melting in the abandoned drinks. I stared at Eleanor, trying to process what she was saying. But why? If he didn't want me anyway, why go to such lengths? It was Marcus's sister, Janet, who answered, stepping forward with a look of dawning comprehension. The trust fund, she said slowly. Grandpa Reed's trust fund. Thomas shot her a warning look, but Janet continued, the pieces falling into place as she spoke. Grandpa Reed had a clause in his will. Any biological grandchildren would receive a trust fund upon turning 21. It was substantial, over $1 million each. She looked at me, then back at Thomas. If Allison had been legally recognized as your daughter, she would have been entitled to her share, Marcus finished, his voice tight with anger, just like Haley was. The implication hit me with the force of a tidal wave. All those years of struggling, my mother working double shifts at the diner, me taking out student loans for college, the tiny apartment we shared with the leaky ceiling and unreliable heat, while a trust fund sat waiting, denied to me by my father's deliberate actions. Thomas was sputtering now, his face red with anger or embarrassment or both. This is ridiculous. Ancient history. Water under the bridge. Is it true? The question came from Haley, who had moved away from her parents to stand in the middle of the room. She looked shaken, her perfect composure cracking. Dad, did you really deny Allison was yours just to keep her from getting her inheritance? Thomas turned to his younger daughter, his expression pleading. Haley, baby, you don't understand. It was complicated. It's a simple question, Haley insisted, her voice stronger now. Yes or no? The silence that followed was answer enough. I felt strange, lightheaded, as if I might float away if not for Marcus's steadying hand on my back. 41 years of believing I wasn't wanted, that I was a mistake, a burden, and now to learn that I had been deliberately erased, not out of indifference, but out of greed. Eleanor was speaking again, her voice gentle as she addressed me directly. Your mother knew Allison, not at first, but eventually. She found out about the trust when you were about 16. She wanted to fight it then, to get you what was rightfully yours, but she was so tired, so worn down from all those years of struggle, and she worried what the legal battle would do to you, having to sit in courtrooms, being questioned, having your very existence debated by lawyers. I remembered that time, my junior year of high school. My mother had been different somehow, quieter, with a new kind of sadness in her eyes. I had attributed it to her working too hard, to the constant stress of making ends meet. Never had I imagined she was carrying this knowledge, this betrayal. So she let it go, Eleanor continued. She chose peace for you over justice, and she made me promise never to tell you. Let her build her own life, she said. Let her know she earned everything she has. Tears were streaming down my face now, unchecked. I could feel Emma's hand in mine, squeezing tight. On my other side, Lucas pressed against me, confused but instinctively protective. Thomas had backed up against the wall, Barbara beside him, both looking cornered. The rest of the party guests were frozen in place, witnesses to the unraveling of a decades-old deception. I think, I said finally, my voice surprisingly steady, that we should leave. Marcus nodded, already gathering our things. Janet approached quickly, hugging me fiercely. I'm so sorry, Allison. None of us knew. Eleanor reached for my hand as we passed. Forgive an old woman for speaking out of turn, she said, but I couldn't bear to hear him call you that word. Not when the real betrayal was his. I leaned down and kissed her soft cheek. Thank you, I whispered, for the truth. As we walked toward the exit, I heard Haley's voice behind me. Dad, how could you? And then we were outside, the afternoon sun still bright, the world continuing as if nothing had changed, though everything had. In the car, Marcus held my hand across the console, saying nothing, just being present. The children were quiet in the back seat, sensing the gravity of what had happened even if they didn't fully understand it. Are you okay, Mom? Emma asked finally, leaning forward. I looked in the rearview mirror, meeting my daughter's concerned eyes so like my own, like my mother's. Not yet, I answered honestly, but I will be. And for the first time in my life, I believed it might actually be true. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and silence. Marcus kept glancing at me, concern etched in the lines around his eyes, but he knew me well enough to give me space. In the back seat, Emma and Lucas whispered to each other, occasionally catching my eye in the rearview mirror before quickly looking away. Our house, a modest two-story colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch, had never looked more like a sanctuary than it did when we pulled into the driveway. Home. A place I had built with love and determination, without a penny of Thomas Reed's money. Kids, why don't you go inside and get changed? Marcus suggested gently as we exited the car. I think Mom and I need a few minutes. They nodded, understanding in their young faces, and headed inside without protest. Lucas paused at the door, looking back at me with worry in his eyes. It's okay, buddy, I assured him with a smile that took more effort than it should have. Just need some grown-up talk time. Once they were inside, Marcus led me to the porch swing, the one he had built the summer after we were married. We sat together, the familiar creak of the chains a comforting soundtrack to my whirling thoughts. Talk to me, Allie, Marcus said softly, his hand finding mine. I stared out at our front yard, the maple tree where we'd hung the kids' first swing, the flower beds I tended each spring, the basketball hoop where Lucas practiced every evening. All of it earned, all of it real. I don't know what to feel, I admitted finally. Angry, hurt, vindicated. It's like finding out the story of your life was written in invisible ink all along, and someone just finally held it up to the light. Marcus nodded, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. It's a lot to process. All these years, I continued, my voice catching, I thought he just didn't want me, that I wasn't good enough, or that I reminded him of a mistake he wanted to forget. But this? To deliberately erase me, to legally deny me just for money? I shook my head, still struggling to reconcile this new reality with the narrative I'd lived with for 4 decades. He robbed you, Marcus said, a rare edge of anger in his voice. Not just of the money, which was rightfully yours, but of the truth, of knowing your mother fought for you, wanted the best for you. My mom, I whispered, tears welling up again. She knew, Marcus. She knew, and she carried that burden alone, to protect me. I thought of Maggie Mitchell, her tired smile after double shifts, the way she'd sit at our tiny kitchen table long after I'd gone to bed, calculating and recalculating our budget, the pride in her eyes when I graduated college, the first in our family to do so, the quiet dignity she maintained even when Thomas and Barbara would pass us on, the street without acknowledgement. She was the strongest person I've ever known, I said. She raised you, Marcus replied simply. That strength is in you too. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of revelation settling around us like an invisible cloak. Finally, I asked the question that had been nagging at me since we left the party. What do I do now? Marcus considered this, his face thoughtful in the gathering dusk. What do you want to do? Part of me wants to call a lawyer first thing Monday morning, I admitted. To fight for what was taken from me. To make him face what he did, legally, publicly. And the other part? I sighed, leaning my head against his shoulder. The other part wonders if it's worth it. If dragging this through courts and depositions, and God knows, what else would just be giving Thomas Reed more power over my life, more of my energy, more of my time. The porch light flickered on automatically as darkness fell, casting a warm glow around us. From inside, we could hear the muffled sounds of the kids moving about, the familiar rhythm of our family life continuing, despite the earthquake that had just shaken my foundation. You don't have to. Decide tonight, Marcus said, pressing a kiss to my temple. Or tomorrow, or next week. This has been buried for decades. It can wait a little longer while you figure out what's right for you. I nodded, grateful for his understanding, for the space he always gave me to find my own way. I need to talk to the kids, though. Explain what happened today. Especially Lucas. He heard that word. We'll talk to them together, Marcus assured me. But yes, they deserve to know their history. The real one. We sat a while longer, the swing moving gently back and forth, before finally heading inside. The house was quiet, Emma in her room with her headphones on, Lucas already in pajamas, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with his tablet. Hey, you two, I called softly. Family meeting. Time. They came without complaint. Emma with a questioning look, Lucas with lingering concern in his eyes. We gathered in the living room, our usual spot for important conversations. Marcus and I on the couch, Emma curled in the armchair, Lucas on the floor leaning against my legs. So, I began, trying to find the right words. Today, at Great-Grandma Eleanor's party, you heard and saw some things that were probably confusing and upsetting. Lucas nodded immediately. Grandpa Thomas was really mean to you. He called you a bad word. The simplicity of a child's assessment. So clear, so unambiguous. I smiled sadly. Yes, he was. And that word, bastard. It's an old-fashioned, cruel way to describe a child whose parents weren't married when they were born. Like you? Emma asked quietly. Yes, like me. My mom, your Grandma Maggie, wasn't married to Thomas when she had me. And some people, especially back then, thought that was something to be ashamed of. That's stupid, Lucas declared with 11-year-old certainty. Despite everything, I laughed. Yes, it is stupid. But people can be cruel about things that are different from what they're used to. Emma was processing with the thoughtfulness that was so characteristic of her. But then Great-Grandma Eleanor said something else happened. Something about money. I exchanged a glance with Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. That's right. What we learned today is that Thomas, your biological grandfather, did something very wrong when I was a baby. He legally denied that I was his daughter, even though he knew I was. Why would he do that? Lucas asked, his face scrunched in confusion. I took a deep breath. For money. His father, who would have been your great-grandfather, had set aside money for all his grandchildren. But if Thomas admitted I was his daughter, I would have received some of that money when I turned 21. So he lied, Emma said, her voice hardening with indignation. He lied about you being his daughter so he could keep all the money for himself and for Aunt Haley. Essentially, yes, I confirmed. And because of that lie, your Grandma Maggie and I struggled financially for many years. Lucas looked up at me, his eyes wide. Is that why you and Grandma Maggie lived in that tiny apartment you told us about? The one where the roof leaked when it rained? My heart squeezed at the memory. The pots and pans we'd arranged on the floor during storms, the way we'd make a game of it, pretending we were explorers in a cave with magical waterfalls. Yes, buddy. If Thomas had been honest, if he had acknowledged me as his daughter, our lives would have been very different. That's not fair, Lucas said with the righteous anger only children can fully embody. No, it wasn't fair. I agreed. But you know what? Your Grandma Maggie was an amazing woman who worked incredibly hard to give me a good life anyway. And because of her, because of the example she set, I learned how to be strong, how to persevere, how to build a beautiful life no matter what obstacles are in the way. Emma was watching me intently. Are you going to sue him for the money he kept from you? Leave it to my daughter to cut straight to the practical heart of the matter. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. That's something I need to think about carefully. If it were me, I'd make him pay, Emma said, with the fierce certainty of 14. Every penny. It's not always that simple, Em, Marcus interjected gently. Legal battles can be long and painful and expensive, and sometimes, even if you win, you lose in other ways. I reached for my daughter's hand. The most important thing right now isn't the money, it's the truth. For so long, I believed something about myself, about my worth, that wasn't true. I believed I wasn't wanted, that I was a mistake. Now I know that my mother fought for me, that she chose me, even when it would have been easier not to. And we choose you too, Mom, Lucas said, wrapping his arms around my legs. Every day. Tears pricked my eyes at the simple, profound statement. I know you do, buddy, and that's worth more than any trust fund. We talked a while longer, answering their questions as honestly as we could, assuring them that despite this revelation, our family was solid, unshakable. Eventually, the conversation drifted to lighter topics. Lucas's upcoming soccer game, Emma's science project, plans for the weekend. Later, after the kids were in bed, I stood in the hallway, looking at the family photos that lined the wall. There was one of my mother holding Emma as a newborn, her face alight with grandmother's joy. There were vacation snapshots, school portraits, candid moments of ordinary happiness. And there, in the center, was my favorite. My mother and me on my college graduation day, both of us beaming with triumph. I touched the frame gently. I wish you had told me, Mom, I whispered, but I understand why you didn't. From behind me, Marcus's arms encircled my waist. She protected you the best way she knew how. I know, I said softly. And now I have to figure out how to protect her legacy, how to honor the Truth without letting bitterness consume me. Marcus rested his chin on my shoulder. Whatever you decide, we're with you. All the way. I turned in his arms, finding comfort in the steady blue of his eyes, in the certainty of his presence. That's all I need, I said. And in that moment, I meant it completely. Sunday morning dawned with a peculiar sense of unreality. I awoke early, the events of the previous day playing on a loop in my mind. Marcus slept soundly beside me, his breathing deep and even. I slipped out of bed quietly, pulled on my robe, and padded downstairs to make coffee. The house was silent in that special way houses are before the rest of the family wakes. Expectant, peaceful, holding its breath. I stood by the kitchen window, watching the sun creep over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. A new day. The first day of knowing the truth. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text message. My heart jumped when I saw it was from a number I didn't recognize. Allison, it's Haley. Can we meet? Just us, please. I stared at the screen, conflicted. Haley and I had never had a relationship to speak of. Growing up, I'd see her occasionally around. Town, at school events, at the mall, once at a community theater production where she played the lead. Always from a distance, always with that invisible wall between us. The sister who had everything I didn't. Our father's name, his time, his pride, his financial support. But her face yesterday, when Eleanor had revealed the truth, the shock, the horror, the genuine dismay, had seemed real. And she had confronted Thomas directly, publicly. After a moment's hesitation, I typed back, the coffee mill. 10 a.m. Her response was immediate. I'll be there. Thank you. The coffee mill was a small cafe downtown, neutral territory. As I showered and dressed, I tried to prepare myself for whatever this meeting might bring. What could Haley possibly want? An apology? Explanations? To defend her father? When Marcus woke, I told him about the text. He frowned slightly. Are you sure about this? After everything that happened yesterday? No, I admitted. I'm not sure at all, but I think I need to hear what she has to say. He nodded, understanding as always. Want me to come with you? I could sit at another table, just be there if you need backup. The offer was tempting, but I shook my head. I think this is something I need to do on my own. At 9:55, I pulled into the parking lot of the coffee mill. The cafe was busy with the after-church crowd, the air fragrant with the smell of fresh brewed coffee and baked goods. I spotted Haley immediately. She sat at a corner table, her blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual polished, business attire. She looked up as I approached, her expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. Allison, she said, standing awkwardly. Thank you for coming. Haley, I acknowledged, sliding into the seat across from her. A waitress appeared and we both ordered coffee. Black for me, latte for her. The small talk about coffee preferences helped ease the initial tension. But once the waitress left, silence fell between us, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Haley took a deep breath. I owe you an apology, she said, looking directly at me. For yesterday, for all the years before, for everything. I studied her face, so like Thomas's in structure, but with a vulnerability I'd never seen in him. You didn't know, I said simply. No, she agreed. I didn't know the specifics about the trust fund, about the legal maneuvers, but I knew you existed. I knew you were my sister, and I never reached out. I never questioned why you weren't part of our lives. The waitress returned with our coffees, creating another brief reprieve. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, gathering my thoughts. We were children, I said finally. It wasn't your responsibility to bridge the gap your father created. But I'm not a child anymore, Haley countered, her voice steady despite the tears welling in her eyes. I'm 27 years old. A lawyer, for God's sake. I should have asked questions. I should have seen the signs. I took a sip of my coffee, considering her words. What signs? The way Dad would tense up whenever your name was mentioned. The way he'd change the subject if anyone asked about you. The fact that we never, ever talked about you or your mother at home. She shook her head, frustration evident in the gesture. I accepted the narrative I was given. That you were just some mistake from before he married my mom. That you weren't really part of our family. The words stung, even though I'd known they were. True. And now? I asked quietly. Haley met my gaze directly. Now I know I've been complicit in something terrible. that my comfort, my education, my lifestyle, all of it came at your expense. The admission hung between us, raw and honest. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me, the wounded child who had grown up feeling lesser than, wanted to agree, to make her feel the weight of that complicity. But the adult in me, the mother, the therapist who worked with children of broken families, recognized that Haley, too, had been a victim of Thomas's manipulations in her own way. "We don't choose the circumstances of our birth," I said finally, "or the stories we're told as children. What matters is what we do once we know the truth." Haley nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. She brushed it away quickly. "After we left the party yesterday, I confronted Dad at home. Really confronted him. He tried to deny it at first, then to justify it, then to minimize it. But when I wouldn't back down, he finally admitted everything." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "He said he was young, ambitious, that acknowledging you would have meant scandal, would have risked his marriage, his position at the company." "And the money?" I asked, the question I really wanted answered. "The money too," she confirmed. "The trust was substantial, over $1 million for each grandchild when they turned 21. I received mine 6 years ago, used it to pay off my law school loans, buy my condo, invest the rest. $1 million. The sum hung in the air between us. What would my life have been like with that kind of financial security? What opportunities might I have had? What burdens might my mother have been spared? Did he ever— I hesitated, uncertain if I wanted to know the answer. Did he ever express regret for what he did to us? Haley's expression told me everything before she even spoke. "He regrets being caught," she said flatly. "He regrets the social embarrassment. But no, I don't think he truly regrets the choice he made." I nodded, unsurprised, yet still disappointed. "And your mother? Barbara?" "Mom." Haley looked down at her latte, swirling it gently. "She claims she didn't know the extent of it, that she knew Dad had denied paternity, but not about the trust fund specifically. I don't know what to believe anymore." We sat in silence for a moment, each processing our own thoughts. Through the cafe window, I could see people walking by, families heading home from church, couples holding hands, ordinary lives untouched by the revelation that had shaken mine to its core. "I want to make this right," Haley said suddenly, her voice firm with resolve. "I can't undo the past, but I can try to make amends. The trust fund money, my portion, I want to split it with you. Half. It should have been yours all along." The offer left me momentarily speechless. It was generous, unexpected, and yet, "I can't take your money, Haley. It's not just my money," she insisted. "It was always meant for both of us, for all of Grandpa Reed's grandchildren. If Dad hadn't lied, if he hadn't manipulated the situation, you would have had your own trust." "Even so," I said gently, "that's not what I want from you." "Then what?" she asked, a note of desperation in her voice. "There must be something I can do, some way to make this right." I considered the question carefully. What did I want? Justice for the past? Acknowledgement in the present? Some guarantee for the future? The answer, when it came, surprised even me. "The truth," I said, simply. "I want the truth to be known. Not hidden, not minimized, not rewritten to make your father more comfortable." Haley nodded slowly. "I can do that. I will do that. And," I continued, "I want to know my other family. Not Thomas. I have no interest in a relationship with him. But your grandfather, my grandfather, is he still alive? Great Aunt Patricia, too," Haley added. "Grandpa's sister. She's in her 90s but sharp as a tack. They should know you exist, that they have another granddaughter, another grandniece. And if you're open to it," I said, the words feeling both strange and right, "I'd like to know you too. Not as a replacement for what was taken, but as whatever we might become to each other now. Two adults with a complicated shared history." Haley's face lit up with cautious hope. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Very much." We talked for another hour, filling in the gaps of our separate lives. She told me about her work at the law firm, her specialization in family law, her recent breakup with her longtime boyfriend. I shared stories about Marcus, about the kids, about my practice helping children process trauma and grief. As our coffee cups emptied and the cafe began to clear out, Haley hesitated, then reached into her purse. "I brought something for you," she said, pulling out a small, worn leather book. "I found it last night, going through some of Grandpa's old things that Dad keeps in his study." She slid it across the table to me. It was an address book, the kind people used before contacts were stored digitally. The leather was cracked with age, the pages yellowed. "Look under M," she instructed softly. I opened the book, flipping to the M section, and there, in faded ink, was my mother's name, Maggie Mitchell, an old address, our first apartment, and a phone number long since disconnected. But next to it, in the same handwriting, were the words, Thomas's daughter Allison, born September 3rd, 1983. My birthday, my existence, acknowledged, recorded, remembered by someone in the Reed family, even as Thomas was legally erasing me. "Who wrote this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Grandpa Reed," Haley said. "It's his handwriting. Dad never knew he kept track of you." I don't think anyone did. I traced the words with my fingertip, this small but significant proof that somewhere, someone, had recognized my rightful place in the family tree. It wasn't $1 million. It wasn't 40 years of fatherly love and support, but it was something real, something true. "Thank you," I said, carefully closing the book and holding it to my chest. "This means more than you know." As we parted in the parking lot, Haley hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged me briefly. "This is just the beginning," she promised, "of making things right, of getting to know each other." I nodded, returning the hug somewhat awkwardly. One day at a time. Driving home, I felt lighter somehow. Not healed, that would take much longer, but as if a window had been opened in a room that had been sealed shut for decades. Fresh air, new possibilities, a different perspective on the past and future alike. That address book sat on the passenger seat beside me, physical proof that my existence had mattered to someone in the Reed family, even if it had never been Thomas. And for today, that was enough to keep moving forward. Monday morning arrived with the jarring buzz of my alarm clock at 6:30 a.m., the familiar routine of getting ready for work, making breakfast for the kids, and checking everyone's schedules provided a welcome sense of normalcy after the emotional turbulence of the weekend. "Mom, I need $20 for the field trip on Wednesday," Emma called as she rummaged through her backpack at the kitchen table. "And I need you to sign my permission slip for the science fair," Lucas added, sliding a crumpled paper across the counter. I smiled at their ordinary requests, grateful for the anchoring effect of parental responsibilities. "Check my purse for cash, Em, and let me see that form, Lucas." Marcus appeared in the doorway, already dressed for work in his architect's unofficial uniform of dark jeans and a button-down shirt. "Morning, team," he said, dropping a kiss on my cheek before pouring himself coffee. "Everyone sleep okay?" The question held extra weight, his eyes searching mine. I nodded, passing him the butter for his toast. Better than expected. After the kids left for school and Marcus headed to his firm downtown, I sat alone at the kitchen table, my second cup of coffee cooling beside me. I had patients scheduled starting at 9 a.m., children dealing with various forms of trauma and anxiety, whose problems suddenly seemed to mirror my own in unexpected ways. How many times had I told those children that their worth wasn't determined by other people's actions, that the way they were treated didn't define who they were, that healing came from acknowledging pain without letting it consume you? Now I needed to apply those same principles to myself. My office was a converted Victorian house 3 blocks from downtown, painted a cheerful yellow with a sign reading Mitchell Family Counseling hanging beside the door. I'd opened the practice 5 years ago, after years of working at the county's child services department. The transition to private practice had been scary, financially risky, professionally challenging, but ultimately rewarding. Another thing I'd built from scratch, without help from anyone named Reed. Jenny, my receptionist, looked up as I entered. "Morning, Dr. Mitchell. Your first appointment canceled, so you've got an extra hour." "Thanks, Jenny," I replied, hanging my coat on the rack. "I'll use it to catch up on paperwork." In my office, with its comfortable chairs, soft lighting, and walls decorated with children's artwork, I settled behind my desk and opened my laptop. But instead of pulling up client notes, I found myself typing Inheritance Laws North Carolina Statute of Limitations into the search bar. The results were complex, filled with legal terminology that made my head swim. I was about to close the browser when my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. "Hello? Allison? This is Patricia Reed, your aunt, I suppose, though we've never had the pleasure." The voice was elderly, but strong, with a crisp New England accent that had survived decades in North Carolina. I gripped the phone tighter, my heart racing. "Ms. Reed, this is Unexpected. Indeed. For both of us, I imagine. Haley called me yesterday evening. Told me quite a story. There was a pause, filled with the weight of unspoken history. I wonder if you might be available for lunch today. The directness caught me off guard. Today? I'm 92 years old, dear. I don't have the luxury of prolonged scheduling. There was a hint of humor in her voice, despite the bluntness. The Riverwalk Cafe at noon? It's downtown, not far from your office, I believe. Yes, I can be there. Excellent. I'll see you then. The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at my phone. Patricia Reed, my father's aunt, a woman I'd never met, never even seen, was suddenly arranging lunch as if we were old friends catching up. The morning passed in a blur of sessions with children who needed my focused attention. I listened, guided, reassured, all while a corner of my mind remained fixed on the upcoming lunch. By 11:45, I was walking the 3 blocks to Riverwalk Cafe, a upscale restaurant overlooking the Cape Fear River. The hostess led me to a table by the window, where an elegant elderly woman sat, her silver hair styled in a neat bob, a strand of pearls at her neck. She looked up as I approached, and I saw my own eyes looking back at me. The same unusual gray-green, the same slight tilt at the corners. "Allison," she said, not rising but extending her hand. At last. I took her hand, cool and papery with the age, but her grip surprisingly firm. "Ms. Reed." "Patricia, please. We're family, after all." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit. I've ordered us both the salmon. I hope that's acceptable." I sat, somewhat taken aback by her presumption, but too curious to object. "That's fine. Thank you." She studied me openly, her head tilted slightly. "Remarkable. You look just like my mother. Your great-grandmother. The same cheekbones, the same eyes." She reached into her handbag and withdrew a small photograph, sliding it across the table. "See for yourself." The photo was old, sepia-toned, showing a young woman in 1920s attire, her expression serious but with a hint of mischief in her eyes identical to mine. "Elizabeth Reed," Patricia said. "A formidable woman. She would have been furious about what Thomas did. Absolutely livid." I touched the photograph gently. "You knew? About me, I mean?" Patricia snorted, an incongruously undignified sound from such a proper-looking woman. "Of course I knew. My brother, your grandfather, knew as well. Why do you think he specified biological grandchildren in his will? He suspected Thomas might try something underhanded." The waiter arrived with our meals, momentarily pausing the conversation. When he left, Patricia continued as if there had been no interruption. "William, your grandfather, he saw Thomas for what he was. Ambitious, yes. Clever in business, certainly, but morally flexible." She speared a piece of salmon with precision. "When your mother became pregnant, Thomas came to William in a panic, worried about his marriage, his reputation, his position at the company. And the trust fund," I added quietly. Patricia's eyes glinted. "Yes, the money too. William made it clear that if you were his biological grandchild, you would be entitled to your share. Thomas didn't like that answer. So he denied I was his," I said, the familiar ache returning. "He tried, but William wasn't convinced. That's why he specified biological in the trust documents. He suspected Thomas might attempt to legally disown you." She shook her head, disappointment evident in the gesture. What William didn't anticipate was that Thomas would take such extreme measures, falsified paternity tests, legal maneuvers. By the time William realized the full extent of it, your mother had moved away, changed her number, and then William had his first stroke. I pushed my salmon around on my plate, appetite diminished. "And after he recovered?" "He never fully recovered," Patricia corrected gently. "He had a series of strokes over the next few years. His cognitive abilities were affected. Thomas took advantage, took control of the family finances, the company. By the time William died, the trust had been established. But the mechanisms for verifying biological connection were compromised. The implication was clear. Thomas had not only legally denied me, he had manipulated his ailing father to ensure I would be excluded from the family wealth. And you?" I asked, meeting her gaze directly. "Where were you during all this?" Patricia didn't flinch from the question. "I was in Boston, running my own company. I visited when I could, but I wasn't here day to day." By the time I understood what Thomas had done, you were nearly 18. I considered reaching out then, but she paused, a flicker of something like regret crossing her face. I made a mistake. I convinced myself it would only complicate your life, open old wounds for your mother. It wasn't your responsibility, I said, though part of me wished she had reached out, had shattered the false narrative I'd lived with for so long. Perhaps not, she agreed, but I've always regretted my inaction. And now, hearing what happened at Eleanor's party, she shook her head. Thomas was always proud, always concerned with appearances, but to publicly humiliate his own daughter, that was beyond the pale. The word daughter from her lips, so casual, so matter-of-fact, sent an unexpected wave of emotion through me. To this woman, there was no question about who I was, where I belonged in the family tree. I'm not here to apologize for Thomas, Patricia continued, setting down her fork. That's his responsibility, though I doubt he has the moral fortitude to do so properly. I'm here because you deserve to know your family history, your heritage, the good and the bad. She reached into her handbag again and withdrew an envelope, thick and official-looking. I'm also here to give you this. I took the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. What is it? Legal documentation, the original trust documents, William's notes about his intentions regarding all his biological grandchildren, and a DNA test request form. Her eyes, so like mine, held steady. If you choose to pursue what is rightfully yours, these will help. I stared at the envelope, its weight suddenly symbolic. I don't know if I want to fight that battle, I admitted. The money? It's a lot, of course. But the legal battle, the public exposure, dragging my children through it all, the choice is entirely yours, Patricia said. But the option should be yours as well. Thomas took that from you. I'm simply returning it. We finished our lunch, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. Her life in Boston, my practice, my children. She told stories about the Reed family history, about my great-grandfather who had started the company that made the family fortune, about summers at a lake house that still belonged to the family. Your children should see it, she said as we prepared to leave. The lake house. It's part of their heritage, too. The idea of Emma and Lucas running along the same shore where my father had played as a child, it created a strange mixture of emotions. Resentment at what had been denied us, yes, but also a tentative hope for reclaiming something that had always been partly mine. At the restaurant entrance, Patricia paused, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. One more thing, she said. Your grandfather, William, he left something specific for you. Something separate from the trust. For me? I echoed, confused. But how could he? He never met me. He knew you existed. That was enough. She reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. This belonged to Elizabeth, his mother. He specifically noted it should go to the first female grandchild to reach 21. Technically, that was you, not Haley. She placed the box in my palm. Inside was a ring, a delicate band of platinum supporting a pear-shaped emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds. It was beautiful, clearly antique, and utterly unexpected. I can't accept this, I said automatically. Patricia closed my fingers around the box. You can and you will. It's yours by right. William would have wanted you to have it. Her voice softened. Consider it a small down payment on 40 years of birthdays and Christmases. As she walked away, straight-backed and dignified despite her age, I stood holding the ring box, feeling the weight of newfound connections, of history both denied and reclaimed. The ring was more than jewelry. It was tangible proof that I had always belonged, whether Thomas Reed acknowledged it or not. The ring felt heavier than its actual weight as I carried it back to my office. I kept the velvet box in my pocket, occasionally touching it to reassure myself it was real. After my last session of the day, I sat alone in my office, finally taking it out to examine it properly. The emerald caught the late afternoon light, sending green fire dancing across my desk. It was beautiful, clearly valuable, but its worth to me went far beyond monetary. This ring had been meant for me by a grandfather who never met me, but who had, in his own way, tried to ensure I received some part of my birthright. I slipped it onto my right hand, surprised to find it fit perfectly. Looking down at, it, I felt a strange sense of connection. To Elizabeth Reed, who had worn it perhaps a century ago. To William Reed, who had wanted me to have it. Even to Patricia, who had kept it safe all these years. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Picking up takeout. Preferences? I smiled, grateful for the ordinary, the domestic, amidst all this emotional upheaval. Thai? The usual? You got it. Home by. 6:30. Love you. I typed back a heart emoji, then glanced at the clock. 5:30. Time to wrap up and head home. I gathered my things, including the envelope Patricia had given me, and said goodnight to Jenny. The drive home was short, but gave me time to process the day's events. Patricia Reed. Direct, unsentimental, but ultimately fair. The ring. A tangible connection to a heritage I'd been denied. The legal documents that could potentially change my financial future, if I chose to pursue that path. At home, Marcus and the kids greeted me with the comfortable familiarity of our evening routine. Lucas was setting the table, Emma helping Marcus unpack the takeout containers, their casual banter filling the kitchen with warmth. Mom! Lucas spotted me first, abandoning his task to give me a hug. Did you have a good day? I got an A on my science project presentation. That's fantastic, buddy, I said, ruffling his hair. I knew all that hard work would pay off. Emma came over, her eyes immediately spotting the ring. Whoa, is that new? It's gorgeous. I hesitated, unsure how to explain. It's actually very old. It belonged to your great-great-grandmother. Marcus looked up, sharply from where he was opening containers of pad thai and green curry. Maggie's mother? No, I said quietly. Elizabeth Reed, my father's grandmother. There was a moment of surprised silence. Then Marcus said calmly, I think we need to hear about your day. Over dinner, I recounted my unexpected lunch with Patricia, the family history she had shared, and the ring that had been intended for me all along. The kids listened with wide eyes, particularly entranced by the idea of a great-great-grandmother they'd never known about before. So we have like a whole other family we never knew? Lucas asked, his brow furrowed in concentration. Sort of, I answered carefully. The Reed family is technically part of your heritage, yes, but family is about more than just blood or last names. It's about who shows up, who cares, who chooses to be present in your life, like Grandma Maggie did, Emma said thoughtfully, and like Thomas Reed didn't. Exactly, I agreed, touched by her understanding. After the kids went upstairs to do homework, Marcus and I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope Patricia had given me between us. Are you going to open it? He asked quietly. I nodded, breaking the seal. Inside were several documents, old yellowed papers with formal legal language, and newer papers detailing DNA testing procedures. According to Patricia, these prove that the original trust was intended for all of William Reed's biological grandchildren, regardless of legal recognition, I explained, scanning the documents. And this, I held up the DNA testing form, would establish paternity conclusively. Marcus read over my shoulder, his expression growing increasingly troubled. This is serious, Allie. If you pursue this, it could get ugly. I know, I sighed, leaning back in my chair. It's not just about the money, though $1 million is, well, it's life-changing. It's about the principle, about Thomas finally facing consequences for what he did. And if those consequences splash back on you, on the kids, it was a fair question, one I'd been wrestling with since Eleanor's revelation. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to march into a lawyer's office tomorrow and start proceedings. Make Thomas squirm, make him publicly admit what he did. But another part is afraid of the cost, Marcus finished gently. Not financial. Emotional. I nodded, grateful as always for his understanding. Exactly. Do I want to spend the next year or more locked in a legal battle? Do I want Emma and Lucas to see their mother fighting over money, even if it's rightfully mine? Do I want to give Thomas Reed that much power over my life again? Marcus reached across the table, taking my hand, the one now wearing Elizabeth Reed's emerald ring. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But remember what you always tell your patients. Healing isn't about getting even. It's about getting free. The wisdom of his words settled over me. Getting free. Wasn't that what I ultimately wanted? Freedom from the narrative that had shaped so much of my life. The story of being unwanted, unworthy, less than. I need to think about it, I said finally. Talk to a lawyer, understand exactly what I'd be getting into. Fair enough, Marcus agreed. No rush. This has waited 40 years. It can wait a little longer. We cleaned up dinner together, the conversation shifting to more immediate concerns, Lucas's upcoming soccer tournament, Emma's interest in joining the debate team, the leak in the upstairs bathroom that needed fixing. The ordinary rhythms of family life continued, unchanged by revelations of hidden truths and potential fortunes. Later that evening, after checking on the kids, both asleep, Lucas sprawled across his bed surrounded by sports equipment, Emma curled neatly with a book still in her hand. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. Almost without conscious decision, I found myself typing an email address I'd looked up earlier that day. Dear Mr. Harrington, my name is Allison Mitchell. I am a family therapist in Wilmington, NC, and I am seeking legal advice regarding a potential inheritance claim. The situation involves a trust fund I believe I was wrongfully excluded from approximately 20 years ago due to deliberate actions taken to deny my paternity. I understand you specialize in estate litigation. If possible, I would appreciate a consultation at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Dr. Allison Mitchell. I stared at the words, my finger hovering over the send button. Was I really ready to do this? To potentially open a Pandora's box of legal proceedings, public exposure, family conflict? Before I could second-guess myself further, I pressed send. The decision to consult a lawyer didn't commit me to anything, I reasoned. It was simply gathering information, understanding my options. That was all. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was the first step toward reclaiming something that had been taken from me. Not just money, but recognition, acknowledgement, truth. The reply came faster than I expected, not 10 minutes later. Dr. Mitchell, thank you for reaching out. I would be happy to discuss your situation. My office can accommodate a consultation this Wednesday at 3 p.m. if that works for your schedule. Please bring any documentation you have regarding the trust and paternity issues described. Best regards, James Harrington, Esquire Harrington and Associates, Estate Law. I confirmed the appointment, then closed my laptop, feeling both nervous and oddly relieved. The ball was in motion now. In bed that night, I twisted the emerald ring on my finger, watching it catch the moonlight filtering through the curtains. Marcus slept peacefully beside me, his presence a comfort as always. What would you think, Mom? I whispered into the darkness, imagining Maggie Mitchell's practical wisdom, her unfailing moral compass. Would you tell me to fight or to let it go? No. Answer came, of course. But as I drifted towards sleep, I could almost hear her voice, tired but determined, the way she'd sound after a double shift at the diner. You do what brings you peace, alligator, not what brings them pain. There's a difference. I fell asleep holding on to that distinction, knowing it would guide whatever came next. Wednesday afternoon found me sitting in the polished waiting room of Harrington and Associates, the envelope from Patricia clutched in my hands. The office occupied the top floor of a historic building downtown, with views of the Cape Fear River visible through tall windows. Everything about the space conveyed quiet wealth and power, from the leather chairs to the tasteful artwork to the discreet, efficient receptionist who had offered me sparkling water upon arrival. I felt distinctly out of place, despite my professional attire and the emerald ring that now seemed to belong on my finger. This was Thomas's world, the world of privilege and connections I had been deliberately excluded from. Yet here I sat, preparing to potentially breach that barrier. Dr. Mitchell, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and rimless glasses, appeared in the doorway. James Harrington, please come in. His office was as impressive as the waiting area. Corner windows, built-in bookshelves, a massive desk of polished mahogany. He gestured to a comfortable chair across from him. Thank you for seeing me, I said, settling into the chair. Of course. His voice was measured, professional. I've handled many estate disputes over the years, though I must say yours sounds particularly intriguing. Why don't you start at the beginning? For the next 20 minutes, I outlined the situation, my relationship, or lack thereof, with Thomas Reed, what I had learned at Eleanor's party, my conversation with Patricia, and the documents she had provided. Harrington listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, but mostly watching me with sharp, assessing eyes. When I finished, he sat back in his chair. May I see the documents? I handed over the envelope, and he spent several minutes reviewing its contents, his expression betraying nothing. Finally, he looked up. Dr. Mitchell, based on what you've shared in these documents, I believe you have a legitimate claim to the trust that was established by William Reed. He tapped the papers with one finger. The original trust documents clearly state biological grandchildren, and Patricia Reed's affidavit regarding William's intentions is compelling. My heart beat faster. So I could actually win? After all this time? The statute of limitations would typically be an issue, he acknowledged. However, there's precedent for exceptions when deliberate fraud or concealment was involved, which appears to be the case here. Thomas Reed took specific, calculated actions to prevent you from knowing about or claiming your inheritance. He leaned forward, his expression serious. That said, I want to be completely transparent about what pursuing this would entail. It would be a complex case, potentially lengthy, almost certainly contentious, and very, very public. Public? I echoed, though I had expected as much. The Reeds are prominent in this community, a case involving allegations of fraud, concealment, and a substantial inheritance would attract attention, local media at minimum, possibly wider coverage given the dramatic elements. I thought of my children, my practice, my carefully constructed life, and the chances of success. Harrington considered this. Based on what you've shared, I'd put it at 60-40 in your favor. The DNA test would be crucial. With conclusive paternity established, your position strengthens considerably. However, litigation is never certain, and Thomas Reed has resources, connections. And the time frame? The costs? 12 to 18 months, potentially longer if appeals are involved. As for costs, he named a figure that made my stomach clench, though he quickly added, we could discuss contingency arrangements, given the potential value of the claim. I sat back, processing this information. The path forward was clearer now, but no less daunting. There is another option, Harrington said after a moment, studying my face. Settlement. If Thomas Reed is rational, he might prefer to resolve this quietly, rather than risk public exposure and potential legal defeat. You think he'd settle? It would be the prudent course for him. The question is whether prudence will outweigh his pride. Harrington's expression suggested he had seen pride win that battle many times before. I could approach his legal team informally, present the evidence, suggest a resolution that avoids court. I considered this, turning the emerald ring on my finger. A settlement would be cleaner, faster, less public. But something about it felt unsatisfying, as if Thomas would once again be controlling the narrative, buying his way out of accountability. I need to think about this, I said finally. Discuss it with my family. Of course. Harrington handed me back the envelope along with his business card. Take the time you need. This is a significant decision. As I left the office, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the riverfront. I walked slowly, letting the fresh air clear my head. The consultation had confirmed what I already suspected. I had a case, but pursuing it would come at a cost beyond money. Time, energy, public scrutiny, emotional toll. Was it worth it? I arrived, home to find Haley's car in our driveway. An unexpected sight. Inside, she sat at our kitchen table with Marcus and the kids, all four hunched over what appeared to be a family photo album. Allison, Haley said, standing as I entered. I hope it's okay that I stopped by. I found some old family photos I thought you might want to see. Of course, I said, setting down my purse and joining them. At the table, Emma moved over to make room for me, her expression unusually animated. Mom, look at this. It's great-great-grandma Elizabeth, the one whose ring you're wearing. The photograph showed a striking woman in 1920s attire, similar to the one Patricia had shown me, but in this one, Elizabeth was smiling, her head thrown back in laughter, looking remarkably modern and alive despite the vintage setting. She was quite the rebel for her time, Haley explained. Went to college, refused multiple suitable matches, married for love instead of social position. She glanced at me. Patricia says you remind her of Elizabeth. The comparison warmed me unexpectedly. I turned pages in the album, absorbing images of people who shared my blood but whose existence I'd never known. William. Reed as a young man, stern but with kind eyes. Patricia in her college graduation gown. Even Thomas as a child, before he became the man who would deny his daughter. There's something else, Haley said, pulling out a manila envelope. I found these in Dad's study last night. Inside were legal documents, copies of the very papers Thomas had used to deny paternity, to exclude me from the trust. But there was something else, a handwritten letter, dated just weeks after my birth, in handwriting I recognized from birthday cards Maggie had kept. Thomas, I won't contact you again after this. I understand your choice, though I can't pretend to respect it. But I want you to know this. Your daughter is beautiful. She has your mother's eyes and your father's chin. She deserves more than you've chosen to give her, but I will make sure she never feels the lack. I don't want your money. I don't want your name for her. But someday she might want the truth. When that day comes, I hope you find the courage to give her at least that much. Maggie. My vision blurred with tears as I read my mother's words. Her dignity, her quiet strength, her absolute certainty that I was worth fighting for, even if she ultimately chose peace over conflict. I thought you should have this, Haley said softly. All of it. The good and the bad. I looked up at her, this half-sister who was becoming something more. A friend, an ally, a connection to a past I'd been denied and a future I was still figuring out. Thank you, I said, reaching for her hand. This means more than you know. After dinner, when Haley had gone and the kids were upstairs, I showed Marcus the documents from the lawyers' meeting, explaining the options Harrington had outlined. So what are you thinking? He asked after I'd finished. I sighed, leaning back against the kitchen counter. I honestly don't know. Part of me wants to fight, to force Thomas to publicly acknowledge what he did, but another part wonders if that's really about healing or just revenge. Marcus considered this. What did your mom say in that letter? She chose not to fight, not because she couldn't win, but because she had something more important to focus on. You. And now I have Emma and Lucas to think about, I added. Do I want them to see their mother locked in a bitter legal battle, even if it's for a just cause? What would you tell one of your patients? Marcus asked gently. If they came to you with this exact situation? I smiled ruefully. I tell them that healing isn't about getting even, it's about getting free. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to punish those who hurt you, but to reclaim your own narrative. Wise words, Marcus said, pulling me into an embrace. So how do you reclaim your narrative in this situation? The question stayed with me through the night and into the next day. As I sat in my office between patients, I found myself drafting an email to James Harrington. Mr. Harrington, after careful consideration, I've made a decision regarding my potential claim against the Reed Trust. I would like to pursue a resolution, but not through protracted litigation. Instead, I propose the following. 1. A DNA test to conclusively establish paternity. 2. A meeting with Thomas Reed, facilitated by you, where I can present my terms directly. 3. A settlement that acknowledges the truth while allowing all parties to move forward with dignity. Please let me know if you can arrange this approach. Thank you, Dr. Allison Mitchell. The response came that afternoon. Dr. Mitchell, your approach is both reasonable and strategic. I will reach out to Thomas Reed's legal team today to begin arrangements. The DNA test can be scheduled at your convenience. Regards, James Harrington. The DNA test itself was anticlimactic, a simple cheek swab at a medical office downtown. The results, however, were anything but 99.9998% probability that Thomas Reed was my biological father. Not that I had doubted it, but seeing the scientific confirmation in black and white carried its own power. Armed with this final piece of evidence, Harrington arranged the meeting for the following week. It would take place on neutral ground, a conference room at his firm, with Thomas, his lawyer, Harrington, and me. Are you sure you don't want me there? Marcus asked the night before. I shook my head. This is something I need to do myself, just me and Thomas, finally facing the truth together. As I dressed the next morning, I chose my outfit carefully. A simple green dress that brought out my eyes, my mother's pearl earrings, and Elizabeth Reed's emerald ring. 3 generations of women who had, in their own ways, shaped who I was. The conference room at Harrington and Associates was intimidatingly formal, a long mahogany table, leather chairs, views of the river. I arrived first, settling myself at one end of the table, Harrington beside me. We waited in silence for several minutes before the door opened. Thomas Reed entered first, followed by a silver-haired man I assumed was his attorney. My father looked older than he had at the party, more diminished somehow. Our eyes met, briefly before he looked away, taking a seat at the opposite end of the table. Thank you all for coming, Harrington began smoothly. We're here to discuss a potential resolution regarding Dr. Mitchell's claim to the William Reed Trust Fund. As you've been informed, DNA testing has conclusively established paternity. Thomas's lawyer, introduced as Richard Pembroke, nodded curtly. We've reviewed the test results. However, the statute of limitations may be overcome due to the deliberate concealment involved, Harrington finished. But rather than debate legal technicalities, I believe Dr. Mitchell would like to address Mr. Reed directly. All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath, centering myself. Thomas, I began, using his first name deliberately. For 41 years, I believed. You wanted nothing to do with me because I was a mistake, an embarrassment, someone not worth knowing. I built my entire identity around that rejection, working twice as hard, proving myself again and again, never asking for help because I'd learned early that it wouldn't come. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent. I now know the truth was more calculated than that. You didn't just walk away. You deliberately erased me. Not because I meant nothing to you, but because I meant $1 million that you didn't want to part with. It wasn't that simple, Thomas said, speaking for the first time. His voice was defensive, but held a note of something else. Perhaps regret? There was my marriage to consider, my position at the company. Please, I interrupted, holding up a hand. Don't insult either of us with justifications. What's done is done. I'm not here to litigate the past. I'm here to address the future. I reached into my portfolio and withdrew a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the table toward him. These are my terms. Thomas and his lawyer bent their heads together, reading. I watched their expressions shift from wariness to surprise. This is unexpected, Pembroke said finally. My terms were simple. First, the trust fund amount that should have been mine, $1 million, would be divided equally between 3 educational foundations. One for single mothers pursuing higher education, one for children of absent parents, and one specifically for foster children aging out of the system. All 3 would bear Maggie Mitchell's name, not mine, not Reed's. Second, Thomas would acknowledge me as his daughter, not publicly if he couldn't bring himself to that level of honesty, but legally, officially. No more denial. Third, I would have access to family medical history, connections to the extended Reed family if I chose to pursue them, and the right to share this heritage with my children. What I didn't demand, the money for myself, the public humiliation of Thomas, the ongoing connection with him that a court battle would entail. Why these terms? Thomas asked, looking genuinely confused. You could fight for the money. Your lawyer clearly thinks you could win. I met his gaze steadily. Because this isn't about the money. It never was. It's about the truth. It's about reclaiming the narrative, my narrative that you tried to erase. And it's about honoring my mother, who gave everything to raise me well despite what you did. Thomas stared at me for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. For the first time, I wondered if he was actually seeing me, not as an inconvenience or a threat or a mistake, but as a person, his daughter. I'll need to consider this, he said finally, though his tone suggested the decision was already made. Of course, Harrington replied smoothly. We'll expect your response by the end of the week. As the meeting concluded and we prepared to leave, Thomas hesitated, then approached me directly while our lawyer spoke in the doorway. The ring, he said, nodding toward my right hand. Elizabeth's emerald. Patricia gave it to you? I nodded. She said it was meant for me. From Grandfather William. It suits you, he said awkwardly. You have her eyes. Everyone always said so. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close to making amends for 40 years of denial and erasure. But it was perhaps the first honest thing he had ever said to me, an acknowledgement, however small, of my place in the family line. Thank you, I said simply, neither accepting nor rejecting. The olive branch, however insufficient it might be. As I walked out of the building into the bright afternoon, I felt lighter somehow. Not healed. That would take much longer, but as if I had set down a burden I'd been carrying for decades. Whatever Thomas decided, I had reclaimed my story. I had honored my mother's strength and dignity. I had chosen healing over vengeance. And in doing so, I had, finally, truly become free. The settlement came through exactly as I had proposed. Thomas Reed, perhaps recognizing that fighting would cost him more than just money, agreed to all terms without amendment. The paperwork was finalized within weeks, the foundations established by the end of the month. I chose not to be present when Thomas signed the documents acknowledging me as his biological daughter. That moment wasn't about reconnection or reconciliation. It was simply about truth finally prevailing over lies. Harrington called to confirm it was done, and with that, a chapter of my life that had defined me for so long was officially closed. Autumn arrived in Wilmington with crimson leaves and crisp mornings. Life continued its familiar rhythms, clients at my practice, Emma's debate, tournaments, Lucas's soccer games, Evenings with Marcus planning our 20th anniversary trip for the following summer. The comfortable, beautiful ordinary that had always been my greatest achievement. On a Saturday in late October, I stood in the kitchen preparing a pot of chili, the house filled with the warm sense of spices and simmering beans. Marcus was in the backyard splitting wood for the fireplace, and the kids were due home from their respective activities by dinner time. The doorbell rang, unexpected. When I opened it, I found Patricia Reed standing on my porch, elegant as ever in a camel coat and silk scarf. "Patricia," I said, surprised. "Please, come in." "I won't stay long," she said, stepping inside. "I wanted to deliver this in person." She handed me a thick envelope. Not legal documents this time, but something else. Inside was a bound leather book, beautifully crafted, with the Reed family, embossed in gold on the cover. "The family history," Patricia explained as I opened it. "Going back 5 generations. I've taken the liberty of updating it to include you and your children in your proper places." I paged through it slowly, taking in the carefully documented lineage, the photographs, the stories of people whose blood I shared, but whose lives I was only now discovering. And there, on a page near the end, was my own entry, complete with my professional accomplishments, marriage to Marcus, and both of my children. Thank you," I said, genuinely moved by the gesture. "It was always yours by right," Patricia replied simply. As was this. She reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a small jewelry box. Inside was a pair of emerald earrings, clearly designed to match the ring I still wore daily. "The complete set," she explained. "Elizabeth wore them on her wedding day. They're meant to be passed down, mother to daughter." "I don't know what to say," I admitted, touching the earrings gently. "Say you'll bring your children to Thanksgiving at the lake house," Patricia said. "William's sister, your great-aunt Margaret, is turning 95, and she's quite determined to meet you. She's the family historian, has stories even I haven't heard." The invitation surprised me. "Thomas will be there?" "Possibly," Patricia acknowledged, "though I believe Barbara has scheduled a cruise conveniently overlapping the holiday. But Haley will be there, and several cousins you haven't met. The choice is entirely yours, of course." I considered it, trying to imagine myself in the lakeside house that featured in so many of the family photographs, introducing my children to relatives they'd never known existed a few months ago. "I'll think about it," I promised, "and discuss it with Marcus and the kids." Patricia nodded, satisfied. "That's all I ask." She moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. The Maggie Mitchell Foundation for Single Mothers. The board would like you to speak at their inaugural scholarship award ceremony next month. They're quite impressed with the foundational work you've done." Pride swelled in my chest at the mention of the foundation, which had already received applications from dozens of women like my mother, determined, hardworking, putting their children's futures above their own immediate comfort. "I'd be honored," I said. After Patricia left, I returned to the kitchen, the family history book and emerald earrings carefully placed on the dining room table. As I stirred the chili, I found myself thinking of my mother, what she would make of all this, how she might feel about the foundations bearing her name, about the Reed family history, now including her daughter and grandchildren. "She'd be proud," Marcus said, as if reading my thoughts as he came in from the backyard, bringing the scent of fresh air and wood with him. "Of you, of the way you've handled all of this." I smiled, leaning into him as he wrapped his arms around me from behind. "I hope so." I tried to honor her way of doing things, with dignity, without bitterness. "So," he said, nodding toward the family history book, "Patricia wants us to come to Thanksgiving?" "She invited us, yes. What do you think?" Marcus considered this. "I think it should be your decision, but for what it's worth, I'm open to it. Might be good for the kids to know that side of their heritage." "Even if Thomas is there?" I asked, the question that had been nagging at me. "Even then," he affirmed. "You're strong enough now to be in the same room with him without it diminishing you. You've reclaimed your story, Allie. He doesn't have the power to rewrite it anymore." Before I could respond, the front door burst open, and Lucas bounded in, still in his soccer uniform, mud-splattered and exuberant. "Mom! Dad! We won! 3-2, and I scored the winning goal in the last minute." His excitement was contagious, and soon the kitchen was filled with his animated replay of the game's highlights. Emma arrived shortly after, bringing news of her debate team's advancement to the state finals. As we gathered around the table for dinner, the conversation flowing easily between soccer strategies and debate techniques. I looked at my family, this small, perfect circle we had created together, and felt a profound sense of contentment. These were the people who had chosen me, who had seen me clearly and loved me completely. Whatever happened with the Reed family connection, this would always be my true inheritance, the love and belonging I had built with my own hands. 2 weeks later, I stood at a podium in the community center downtown, addressing the first recipients of the Maggie Mitchell Foundation scholarships. 5 women, ranging in age from 19 to 42, each with children depending on them, each determined to create better lives through education. My mother believed that education was the path to freedom, I told them, feeling surprisingly calm despite the crowded room. Not just economic freedom, but the freedom to define yourself, to choose your own path, to write your own story. From the audience, Marcus and the kids watched proudly. Beside them sat Haley, who had asked to attend and had subsequently joined the foundation's board of directors. In the back row, partially hidden but unmistakable, stood Patricia Reed, straight-backed and attentive. The circumstances of our birth, who our parents are, what resources we start with, what obstacles we face, these things shape us, but they don't define us, I continued. What defines us are the choices we make, the people we love, the good we create in the world. As I spoke, I touched the emerald ring on my finger, my great-grandmother's legacy, now mine to carry forward. I thought of my mother's struggle and sacrifice, of my own journey from rejection to reclamation, of the foundations that would help women like her for generations to come. Today, you're receiving financial support for your education, but what you're really receiving is recognition, that your dreams matter, that your children's futures matter, that your determination is seen and valued. The women in the front row, the EAV, scholarship recipients, nodded, some wiping away tears, others sitting tall with newfound confidence. I saw my mother in each of them, her strength, her hope, her absolute refusal to let circumstances dictate destiny. Maggie Mitchell raised me to believe that dignity isn't something anyone can take from you. It's something you carry inside, regardless of how others treat you. She taught me that true. Wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in integrity, in love, in the courage to face each day with hope. After the ceremony, as we mingled with the scholarship recipients and foundation board members, Haley approached, a tentative smile on her face. "That was beautiful," she said. "Your mother would be so proud." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely touched, "for being here, for supporting this." She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about Thanksgiving. If you decide to come to the lake house, I want you to know that I'll be there, that I'd like you and your family to be there too." I studied her face, so like Thomas's in structure, but with a warmth, an openness he had never shown me. "We'll be there," I said, surprising myself with the certainty of the decision. It's time. As Thanksgiving approached, I found myself both nervous and oddly calm about the prospect of entering the Reed family circle in an official capacity. Marcus helped me pack. The kids were excited about the lakefront activities Haley had described, and I was ready to step into this new chapter with open eyes and a whole heart. The day before our departure, a small package arrived at the house. Inside was a silver-framed photograph of my mother, young, perhaps 20, laughing in what appeared to be a park. A note accompanied it. "Allison, I found this among my father's things. It seems William kept track of your mother over the years, though from a distance. I thought you should have it. Whatever happens tomorrow, know that you have always belonged in this family, whether acknowledged or not. The truth has a way of emerging, eventually. Safe travels, Patricia." I placed the photograph on my bedside table, next to one of my mother holding Emma as a baby. 2 worlds, finally connecting after decades of artificial separation. On Thanksgiving morning, we loaded the car and began the drive to Lake Jordan, where the Reed family lake house had stood for generations. The children chattered. Excitedly in the back seat, Marcus drove steadily, and I watched the landscape change from coastal flatlands to rolling hills. "Nervous?" Marcus asked quietly, reaching for my hand across the console. "A little," I admitted. "But mostly I feel ready. Whatever happens, I know who I am now. That's enough." As we rounded the final curve in the road, the lake came into view, vast and blue, reflecting the clear autumn sky. And there on the shore stood the house from the family photographs, a sprawling structure of wood and stone, with a wraparound porch and dock extending into the water. Several cars were already parked in the circular drive. As we pulled in, the front door opened and Haley stepped out, waving. Behind her stood Patricia, elegant as always, and several other people I recognized from photographs in the family history book but had never met. "Ready?" Marcus asked as he turned off the engine. I looked at my family, my husband of nearly 20 years, my beautiful, curious children, the life we had built together. Then I looked at the house, at this branch of my heritage I was finally claiming. "Yes," I said, feeling the weight of Elizabeth's emerald ring on my finger, the echo of my mother's strength in my heart. "I'm ready." As we walked toward the house, toward these people who were both strangers and blood relations, I felt a profound sense of coming full circle. The girl who had grown up believing she wasn't wanted was now a woman who knew her own worth, who had reclaimed her narrative, who had transformed rejection into something beautiful and healing. "Welcome," Patricia said as we reached the porch, extending her hands to me. "Welcome home." And in that moment, surrounded by family both chosen and born, I understood that home wasn't a place or a name or a bloodline. It was truth. It was love. It was the peace that comes from finally, fully embracing your own story, all of it, the pain and the joy, the loss and the finding. It was, at your long last, belonging completely to myself.